You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Allyn Root, who's the best-selling author of 7 books. He's a regular guest on Fox News. In fact, he's on hundreds of radio stations coast to coast talking about politics in the United States. Wayne, it's a pleasure to have you.
Hey, Doug, it's great to be on, and I am Jewish by birth, and I'm a big fan and lover of Israel and defender of Israel, so it's an honor for the first time in my life to be on Israeli media.
Okay, so we will have to bring you here very soon to talk about it face-to-face. What I'd like to talk about at the moment now is one of the big issues in the United States, in fact, around the world, and what's really causing a huge collapse in Europe as well, is the magnitude of the problem of government workers. This seems to be your real expertise. Could you give us a summary of where we've been and where we're going right now?
Yeah, well, my summary has to start and end not with the United States, but with, as you brought up, Europe, when you see that Spain and Italy and Greece and Portugal, Ireland, I mean, there's many of them, but eventually I think you'll see UK and France as well on the edge of economic disaster, teetering on the verge of the cliff. The reason why, in my opinion, there are many reasons that led to it, mostly, too much government spending, too many entitlements, too many wars in America is another additional factor. But overall, the number one factor that I've seen in both Europe and America is too many government employees, allowing them to retire way too early, giving them gigantic bloated salaries, and what I would call not even bloated, obscene pensions, and free health care for life. When you add it together, it's a toxic mix, and it's a recipe for disaster, and it's the reason that you see Greece and Italy and Spain and all the others on the verge of economic Armageddon, and it's coming to an America near you. We're just a few years behind. The reality is that Europe has had this kind of quasi-socialist system with free health care, too many government employees, and too many pensions, and allowing everybody to retire early. This all happened, much sooner and much bigger in Europe than it did in America. It's only come to America in the last 20 years. Collective bargaining is what we call it, where we allow the government employees to basically bargain with a gun to the taxpayer's head, and nobody defending the taxpayer, no lawyer in the room to defend the taxpayer, only a lawyer representing the union and several union thugs sitting around dictating to the politicians what the government employees or public employees are allowed to make. And ironically, they're not only dictating with a gun to the head of the politician because there's no lawyer representing the taxpayers, but they're also negotiating with a friendly politician who loves them in most cases because they're the ones who elected him. So it's the most corrupt system I've ever seen in my entire life. It reminds me of the mafia.
It's certainly leading to no good from a financial standpoint. In the past, we've had presidents who've been able to stand up to it. Ronald Reagan himself was the one who fired the air traffic controllers when they tried to put a gun to his head.
Well, and by the way, his reasoning is what we should be bringing up day and night today, Doug, because, here you have people that could not be easily replaced. Can you imagine how hard it is to find a qualified person to be an air traffic controller? I have no idea how you make sure planes do not crash into each other. That's not my expertise. I'm sure it's not yours. Can you imagine the chance that Ronald Reagan took, the chutzpah, as you might say in Israel, or I would say as a New York Jew, the chutzpah it took to fire in one foul swoop every specialized air traffic controller in America and just pray and assume and keep your fingers crossed behind your back that there wouldn't be one single airplane crash with 300 people dying and you as president would be blamed for all of it, for every one of those deaths. But guess what? He did it, and there was no crash ever blamed on that situation, and they were all fairly easily replaced in fairly quick fashion. So today, the number one argument you hear in America from teachers and policemen and firemen and all government employees, janitors, secretaries, truck drivers, snowplow drivers, they all say the same thing. You can't replace us. What would you do without us? We're invaluable, and we're educating your children. Well, I would say if you could replace airline controllers, you could replace air traffic controllers, you could replace almost anybody instantly. And so I think the argument doesn't hold if tomorrow you cut every government employee's salary by half and their pension by 80%, and you said the jobs are now open, you'd have long lines in a fairly bankrupt, insolvent America right now. You'd have lines going miles and miles around the block for unemployed people who would love to get a chance to have the same job with half the salary and 80% less benefits and pensions.
So if we assume that the politicians really who allowed this to happen over the past few decades were aware of the problem, I mean, let's face it, they're not walking in with their eyes closed. They are aware that the debt is continuing to grow by trillions of dollars every every year or so. How do they expect this to continue? What are they thinking?
Well, what they're thinking is politicians are the most selfish, ego-driven human beings in the entire world. And by the way, I was the Libertarian Party vice presidential
nominee. So you are a
so
politician yourself,
I am
right?
A politician, yes, but
doesn't apply to you, I hope, right?
No, but I have an all-time record in the history of Vegas. One wife with 4 kids. That's an all-time record in Las Vegas, where I'm from. And my kids range in age between 20 years old and 4. And I don't think of myself when I'm in politics and when I'm debating these issues on TV and radio. You know, I did 1,200 interviews last year, and I don't get paid a dime for any of them. Can you imagine the time and the sacrifice to my business and my family? But I did it all because I am leading a fight, and the fight is that our country will be bankrupt, and therefore my children, my 4-year-old daughter, my 7-year-old son, my 12-year-old son, my 20-year-old daughter, they'll have no future in this country. My future grandchildren will have no future. They'll pay 80 or 90% taxes, which to me is the definition of socialism or Marxism. It's like the old Soviet Republic or the old People's Republic of China or Cuba. They all had communism. Their system was a failure. Their people suffered. It was shared misery. In Cuba, they're still driving 1958 Oldsmobiles and carts with donkeys leading them. In America, you have a chance at success. Why? Because taxes are low, government gets out of the way, government is smaller and more limited, and the people theoretically have the power. That's what the U.S. Constitution was supposed to dictate. Now we have one privileged class. I call them the real 1%, if you've heard that term. You know, you've got 21 million government employees who seem to think that they're better than the people who are paying their salaries. We, the taxpayers, are paying their salaries, yet I and my fellow taxpayers are going to work till I'm 90 years old, till the day I die, till I'm on my deathbed, to pay all the darn taxes, to pay for their giant pensions. And ironically, none of us have a pension in the private sector. So we're paying their $100,000 pensions. None of us have a pension. I don't know anybody who owns a small business or is in the private sector who has a pension. You just live on what you've saved throughout your life from your salary. Okay. The idea that you give someone $100,000 a year and they're able to retire at age 50, Doug, if they live to 90, you do the math, that's $4 million you're paying them. Add in cost of living increases, it's $5 million. Add in free health care and other benefits, it's $6, $7, or $8 million for every single, not fire chief, not police chief, not captain, just an average cop on the beat. You're giving them an $8 million golden parachute that nobody else has, and you're wondering why America's bankrupt. We can't afford it anymore. I'm sorry, even though I love cops and I love firemen and they're heroes, so are soldiers. They risk their lives. You don't give every average soldier, a private in the Army doesn't get a $100,000 pension at the age of 50. The generals get $100,000. Average privates might get 10 or 20,000. Somehow we've decided in America, average government employees, whether they be janitors, secretaries, a cop on the beat, a snow plow truck driver, a bus driver, they're all retiring with $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 pensions, and the fire captain is getting $400,000 pensions all over the United States. Wow. It's insane. It can't work. The system will not remain solvent.
I think I better move back to the United States and learn about fire. We're talking to Wayne Allyn Root, who seems to be a little bit unhappy about paying taxes to support all these people's pensions. Wayne, I got to tell you, talking from the perspective of someone sitting in Israel and as a financial advisor, you know, my day job is that I run a financial planning and investment services company here in Jerusalem. I deal mostly with people who left the United States and have moved to Israel, some of them for ideological reasons and some of them for economic reasons. Based on what you're telling me now, I got to tell you, I'm a little distressed. Should I be advising my clients to continue investing in America? Is there really a future other than just a dream?
Well, I guess it depends on what happens on November 6th, which is our presidential election day. And of course, also when you reelect Congress and you vote on the United States Senate and you find out if the Senate changes hands, a lot of things are going to happen on November 6th that portend either good or bad for the future of the United States of America. Only a couple of weeks ago, from the point you and I are having this interview, we had a major, I guess you'd call thunderstorm, lightning storm in America, a major sea change, and that was in the state of Wisconsin, where government employee salaries are obscene and their pensions are outrageous, and the state had, I believe it was right around a $4 billion budget deficit. when the new Republican conservative governor, Scott Walker, took over, his first act was to basically fight the unions and to declare collective bargaining no longer in effect, and therefore cut their pensions and cut their salaries. And they got so mad, you have no idea, Doug, the kind of hornet's nest he created. Major strikes and protests, and major cities weren't even moving because there were thousands of people in the streets fighting and protesting. And you know what the end result was? They went from it was either a $3 or $4 billion budget deficit when he took over overnight, just by making a few cuts in government employee salaries and pensions and the way government employees are allowed to hire for their own health insurance. Just from that, in a quick year, they went from a $3 to $4 billion budget deficit to a $150 million budget surplus. Wow. Amazing. You could do that for the whole country. So they demanded his recall. They got 1 million signatures. There was a recall election, and Governor Walker literally was reelected, I guess you'd say, or beat the recall by a landslide. I made that prediction in the media. I became kind of a celebrated guy for that prediction. I said he'd win by a landslide because the average taxpayer is finally awoken from their slumber in America. We realize we've been ripped off. We're outraged. We realize that we don't have $100,000 and $200,000 pensions, and that we're the ones paying for these other people to retire at age 50.
But wasn't that the deal that these guys got when they started working? There was not an understanding. There was a contract, right, that allowed them to get this.
Well, here's the thing. I have two answers to that. Number one, the social contract, forget about the physical one, the social contract for the last 100 years in America is that if you're a government employee, you have nothing to worry about. You have no chance of losing your job unless you're an axe murderer or actually convicted of rape. And it's almost has to be rape of someone while you're on the job. It's almost impossible to lose a public employee job. So for the right to have job security for the rest of your life and never have to worry while the rest of us in the private sector are scared to death we'll lose our jobs, or in my case, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, scared to death, am I going to raise the money to start this business? Once I start it, will it survive? Will it go out of business? Will my family starve? These people have no worries. In return for no job security, it was well known for the last 100 years, you took a public service job and you got paid much less than the average person in the private sector, but you got the job security. Somehow over the years, because of collective bargaining and because of mostly liberal, progressive, democratic politicians who were elected by public service unions who gave them millions, in return, the deal was for that bribe, they gave them a bribe and said, now we're going to raise your salaries dramatically. And overnight, it seemed to happen overnight, but it was about a 20-year process. They got the same job security, job for life, tenure for life, but their salaries went from well below what the private sector average person gets to as much as twice as much, plus pensions, plus free health care for life. Crazy. So now you get to the physical contract you mentioned. Can we break them? Well, in the private sector, if your company's going bankrupt and you go into bankruptcy court, you get to break all the union contracts because that's the only way to survive. I believe the only way America will survive as a country is states and cities and counties will all have to declare bankruptcy. Right now, cities and counties and states counties can, states cannot legally declare bankruptcy. But that law is going to have to be changed soon because several states like California and Illinois are right on the verge of bankruptcy right now, and they can't afford everything they've promised all these government employees. So I would recommend change the law, allow states to declare bankrupt. Cities and counties can, let them all end those contracts, rip them up in bankruptcy court, start over again with reasonable salaries and pensions.
All right. We have been talking to Wayne Allyn Root. He's the best-selling author of 7 books. He's also, as we said, a little unhappy about paying for the rest of his life to support lots of people who really aren't giving the services that perhaps they should be. Wayne, in the last couple of seconds, just tell me, how can people follow you and your work?
Yes, and the other thing I do want to tell you, though, is a lot of them are doing the service they're supposed to do. I don't want you to think I don't like government employees or I think they're bad people or they're lazy. Not true. Some of them are.
Sorry, I
no, but a lot of no, that's fine. That's fine. A lot of them are great. What I'm saying to you is I love my soldiers in America, but I don't think every one of them deserves a $150,000 a year pension for 40 years for not working. I love my policemen and firemen, and I love every government employee, but I don't necessarily think they deserve 6-figure incomes for not working for the rest of their lives, retiring at age 47. So I think out of reasonableness and fairness and equality, we need to change the rules and we need to get back to something that's more sane and more common sense. Even if they're good people and doing a good job and working hard, I do all that too, and I don't get a pension. So that's my point. My website is root4america.com. That's ROOT, like Wayne Root, root4america.com. And my book, my latest book, is The Conscience of a Libertarian, that you can find at any good bookseller or Amazon.com.
Okay, Wayne Root, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Doug, it's an honor, and especially to be on the air, not just on your show, but in a country I love, Israel. So good luck and God bless to all.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.